Good morning, everybody, again, and welcome to the PSD2 discussion. Maybe it's a good question to start with. Who is a PSD2 expert in the room or knows quite well where PSD2 is all about? Who has no clue where it's all about? Well, it's a bad sign if you all four put your hand up. Well, what we will do here is we will have a discussion about PSD2. What does it mean for the consumer? What does it mean for traditional financial players? We have Liisa here. What does it mean for the challengers? We have Lars here. We have David, who will join into the discussion and spice it up a little bit, like this morning. But before we do that, let's examine PSD2. Let's examine what it is, where we're standing with it, and what consequences it could have. And therefore, we asked Bastiaan from Houthoff, from the law firm Houthoff Buruma, Dutch law firm, where we were yesterday for the pre-conference of these FinTech Awards, to explain a bit about PSD2. So, Bastiaan, I give you the mic.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me kick off and warm up a little for the discussion later. I'll try to keep it brief. That's difficult for a lawyer, but still. Let me try. I will not discuss all about PSD2 because it's impossible. I want to focus on basically four topics or four parts of PSD2. What it is, how did it came about, where does it come from, what will be the consequences, and maybe to finish off and then hand over to Kevin quickly with some final thoughts in order for the discussion to start. Well, first of all, what is PSD2? Not so much for the people already fully involved, but still. PSD2 is a European directive. More particularly, it's the Directive 2015-23/6, dated back 25 November 2015. That's basically technical, but what is it about? It's about payment services. Payment services, from a European perspective and from PSD2 perspective, is a predefined set of services. Examples include the execution of payment transactions, the issuance of payment instruments, and under PSD2, very important, new services like payment initiation services and account information services. I will touch upon those in a moment because they are new and are important to the market, I believe. You may say this is very much services that used to be provided, at least historically, by the banks only. And that's presumably a part to discuss later on. PSD2, as well as its predecessor PSD, is one of the many European directives all aiming to create a single European market, in this case in relation to payments. Well, how did PSD2 come about? Where does it come from? Well, first of all, we already have a regime, European regime on payments, which is the PSD, which is currently in effect, and more importantly, still applies until 2018. So at present, we are working under the regime. The old regime, you may say, will not be discussing in a moment, which will still apply until 2018. In the Netherlands, this regime was implemented in November 2009, and that was pretty much the case throughout Europe, at least. That was meant to be. I don't have exact figures how other jurisdictions dealt with that. From time to time, jurisdictions are late. So we are working at present with a regime that's already in force for more than 5 years. And that's also a reason why we're now considering, and not even considering, but are working with a new regime, or starting to work with a new regime, PSD2. Because as a standard principle under European law, after 5 years, a set of European rules will be revisited in order to see whether it still works or has to be amended. So that's basically the first reason why PSD2 came about. The second reason, of course, is that after such a review, it often turns out that the previous regime, or the existing regime, you should say, is no longer fully up to speed. And there were basically three areas where it was felt that it was no longer up to speed. First of all, there were all kinds of technical innovations seen in the market that were not quite covered by the PSD regime. Secondly, various market sectors were subject to rapid growth, and which is also felt important from a regulation perspective. And finally, there were all kinds of new services arising. So that's basically why the European Commission at some point decided to draft this new regime that was finally adopted in November 2015 and will start to apply in 2018. So still approximately 2 years from now. What are the consequences of this new regime? What is new? There's a lot that stays the same. Maybe that's a comforting thing for the old industry to start with. Many rules already exist and basically stay the same. But as always, there are new rules and more rules, because that's the tendency under European law for quite some time already. So what's new? Well, first of all, and I think for today probably the most important aspect, is that the scope of the regime is widened. New service providers are called under this new regime. And they are often referred to as third-party providers, which can be divided in two groups. First of all, the so-called payment initiation services providers. So parties initiating payment services or payments with bank accounts not held by themselves, so with bank accounts held, for example, by the banks. And the second group concerns the account information services providers. All kinds of services providers who provide all kinds of planning tools, financial tools, to gather financial information for clients about, again, accounts not held with these service providers themselves. I think that's pretty much the most important development we are seeing under PSD2, that these parties who are now not caught under the regime will be caught under the new regime and will hence be subject to some form of licensing. The second element, and that's actually attached or a consequence of this first development, is that in order to enable these third-party providers to provide their services, they need to have access to the accounts of the banks. Of course, with the consent of their clients, but they need to have access to do their job. Otherwise, they cannot initiate a payment and they cannot provide the information on the financial position of their clients. So this new PSD2 regime introduces a guaranteed access to the payment accounts. And that's something that the banks, for example, will have to live with. If they are asked to provide information, just as an example in respect of account information services providers, they will have to provide this information in some form. To what extent and how detailed is still pretty much subject to discussion, and that's the details where it gets really messy, I guess. But the principle is that they have to provide this access and the information. Another element which I personally find very difficult, but that's presumably lacking my technical expertise, is that PSD2 introduces strong customer authentication for online and electronic payments. Basically meaning that for those payments there is enhanced customer authentication required. And again, here, it's all in the details. Further rules will be set. The regime that has now been published some months ago doesn't really explain what this will all be about, but it is up to the European Banking Authority to draft all kinds of rules and details thereon, which are expected later this year. So at present, at least I cannot fully foresee what this will bring, and we'll have to await those further rules. Well, maybe a final thing to touch upon very briefly is that some exceptions are tightened. As always, when there's regulation, you see parties evading rules, and regulators, and especially legislators, legislators not always find that very helpful, so this new regime tightens the rules. On that, and I think then we're over to Kevin, brings us to the question, what will this bring for market parties? Is this a threat only for banks, for example, because they have to provide information on their accounts or grant access to their accounts? Or is it also an opportunity to hook up with client again together with those parties? I think that's pretty much for the discussion. The only thing I want to finish with is that we now have PSD2. You may say prepare for PSD3, because at present we are working under PSD1, you may say. This new regime will enter into force in 2018, which is 2 years from now, which is quite a lot of time in this industry. So maybe in 2 years or 5 years' time, we have again discovered that the rules are stale and need to be amended.
Well, thank you very much, Bastiaan. Let's now... Oh, we have a question from the audience. We always like that, so I will hand the mic to you, sir.
Thank you. Just a small question. Does the access to account and information also apply to securities accounts?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I must admit that I don't have the exact answer to that. The principle is that there should be access, but then again, the basic question, for example, if you're looking at information, is what information should the bank provide? Should the bank, for example, only provide a consolidated number, or in respect of a payment transaction, say the transaction is possible or is not possible, or should it provide more? And in respect of particular accounts, I think that's very much an open question, at least to me at this point.
Let's go to the panel. Well, because we're going to evaluate for whom it's a chance, for whom it's an opportunity, and what will it mean for the consumer. Lisa, I want to start with you. I said you are here from the traditional financial sector. You're from Nordea. Can you tell us a bit about Nordea? And is it a chance? Is it an opportunity? How are you going to cope with PSD2?
Thank you very much. So I think it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I definitely think that it's an opportunity, and I'll explain why Nordea thinks that it's an opportunity. Nordea is probably the biggest bank in the Nordics. So we are one of the systematically important banks in Europe on the European level. We have some 11 million customers across the Nordics and the Baltics, and so we are a big bank in the area. Why do we think that it's an opportunity? It is that because now we're getting rules and regulations in place for working together with the fintechs and working together with the partners. We really look forward to collaborating more. We have already done a couple of things there, but probably we can touch that later. But we think that it's a great opportunity since we have the market position, we have the customer base, we have a lot of strengths, and but the innovation pace within big companies is not always sufficient. So that's why I think that we need the collaboration with the newcomers as well.
I fully believe it's an opportunity for you, but I think it's also a bit of a pain in the ass, I can presume. Can you describe the pain involved for you in this regulation?
Well, that's where it comes to my role in the bank, because I'm kind of the disruptor in the bank. So we are actually, it was very interesting to hear the morning talk, because that's exactly what we're doing. We are changing the culture within the bank. And that's actually quite massive things that we are doing, because we are changing the not only the payment system, we're going from 45 systems to one. But we are also changing the whole account systems, the core banking system, the data warehousing system, all the systems. So we are building a truly digital bank from the scratch. So I don't think that any European bank has done it. And we are in the middle of that change. And it's beautiful, but that doesn't make you competitive by itself. But then we are also putting a lot of money on the front end, because we have a relationship banking strategy, and we want to keep that going forward. And we want to make sure that we are the agile bank in the future as well.
But between the lines, I also, in our preparation, heard something You said sort of like we're doing all the work and some others come and take our fruits of our labor. What did you mean by that?
We were actually agreeing on so many things with Lars that we had to bring a little bit debate as well. And it's okay. Of course, it takes a lot actually to maintain the infrastructure. And so we, one of the strengths actually that we have working in this space is also that we are very familiar working with the regulation. We are very familiar with the compliance stuff because that is coming from windows and doors, I can tell you. So we are very familiar with that, but that is a huge cost as well. And now it's quite interesting situation that the newcomers can piggyback on our infrastructure free of charge. Isn't that amazing? Do you call that a level playing field?
Well, Lars, isn't that amazing? Can you explain a little bit about FIGO and what this regulation can mean for you, and whether you're stealing from Liisa or not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name is Lars. Said the company is called FIGO. We are call ourselves a banking service provider. So, as mentioned, the third-party provider we are a third-party provider under the PSD2. We are accessing the customer's bank account, of course, only with the consent of the customer. Access the bank account, provide information through an API to developers who want to develop new amazing things, top of financial data. We're not only access information, also able to initiate payments through the API. So at the end, everything what usually the bank kept in her silo and just like hold it and didn't want anyone to access, we are enabling people from outside the industry or outside the bank to access this data. So regarding PSD2 is probably the best thing that could ever happen to us. When we started two and a half years ago, trying to talk about people to banks about PSD2, they were not really aware of the situation and didn't believe the impact of PSD2. Right now, when now talking to banks, the landscape completely changed, and it's helping us a lot because it's taking out the gray area. Before, there were also other companies like us who have done exactly the same, and it was accepted by many stakeholders in the industry. But now PSD2 is actually putting a law on top of that and saying, okay, you can do it as a white area, not a gray area anymore. For us, it's a huge driver.
David, what do you expect PSD2 will do, and what's in it for the consumer, and what will change for him?
That's an interesting question. I've had the painful task of reading all 137 different pages of fun, and I think you describe it. There's a lot of kind of anger in there in terms of actually the intent, but not a lot of detail in terms of specifically what's going to happen. For me, I think the funnest thing about it, and you'll be not really surprised based on this morning that I'm all for it, shall we say, is it's kind of making banks do a bunch of stuff that they know that they should have been doing but have never really got around to do. Right? You know, there's no bank on the planet that hasn't probably had a discussion, probably both in the IT divisions and actually broader in terms of the senior executives and the board about, hey guys, should we be sort of, collaborating with other people and opening up a little bit in terms of what we're doing? And, these things called APIs have come along, guys. Should we be exposing them and working with others? And most people, there's only a handful of banks, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lars, but there's only a handful of banks really that have embraced this and gone about doing it because it's bloody scary. Actually the level of control that you start to lose when actually somebody else can start, talking through your customers, actually having access to that information is quite a big deal. So, I can understand why most banks have just sort of said, no, thank you, I'll kind of wait. But, the other fun thing is, every bank on the planet will have a clause within their terms and conditions that you sign up to when you gain access to mobile or internet banking that says, do not share these things with anybody. And if you do, the risk is yours, not ours. And this is, fundamentally changing that. It's kind of forcing T's and C's change across the entirety of Europe with regards to what customers can and can't do from a bank's perspective. And for me, that's, absolutely refreshing in terms of what we're doing. I think the beauty of it is going to be that the amount of, I know, Lars, you've been speaking about the sort of beauty of APIs before PSD2 was really even a kind of a thing type thing. So, you've been way ahead in terms of actually what could be done if people who can move a lot fleeter of foot and gain access to data can actually do and deliver experiences to customers. But, you know, the ability for customers to get proper choice in the market in terms of, do I want, you know, this version of the experience in terms of doing it, or, you know, work with these people who are, you know, maybe a little bit more agile, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more daring from an experiential perspective, then, you know, for me, choice is always a good thing.
You wanted to react, Liisa?
Yes, I just can't be without commenting. I think it's very, very good, very many good things that you're talking about. I think the authentication, the customer credentials, that is one of the central issues, as you rightly pointed out, in the legislation, which is still quite open, as Bastiaan was saying in the beginning. So how is that going to be happening? So are the consumers really forced to pass on the credentials to the TPP, or is there another arrangement so that because the bank must be able to authenticate the customer with strong authentication, and that's something where we are actually quite advanced, because we have strong authentication with our customers. And we, of course, need to have that also going forward. That's also in the legislation, that there needs to be strong authentication. And I think that that's quite crucial, that we keep the strong authentication and also the link that the customer needs to be authenticated all the way through bank, and the customer must not give the credentials to the TPP, but there will have to be another arrangement. So that's something that is still open, but I hope that there is going to be an reasonable solution for that, which works in the market, but also is protecting the customer's money in the bank, because that's what we are. Like, we have to make sure that there is no fraud, or there is nobody that shouldn't be accessing the account is not there.
Yeah, I think
and that's why we have to make sure that the rules are right from the beginning.
I think the question around liability in terms of where that sits is that's going to have to be something that's sort of continually addressed in terms of this. I think my concern with a lot of the organisations that I've seen and their approach to kind of responding to this is, you know, if you look at previous legislation that's come through, if you look at things like My Data, you know, legislation treated as a bar for experience, or we are compliant to legislation, has kind of led to a lot of the problems that we're seeing today, really. So, you know, things like My Data was seen to be a forerunner for this, and actually is kind of what's really led to, you know, PSD1 and PSD2 having another crack at actually trying to open up banks and make them a little bit more kind of involving from an environmental perspective. But, you know, treating it as a lowest common denominator in terms of adhering to a regulation is probably why, you know, they keep kind of increasing the fidelity. You know, these guys are, you know, you point around PSD3. If PSD2 doesn't work, they'll turn up the heat with PSD3. You know, they're going to be reasonably relentless with kind of making sure that banks do open up. So
for a long time we've heard the legislature is stacked against the fintech entrepreneur, is the biggest savior or guardian of the big banks. That's something that seems to change. Is that correct? That attitude amongst legislatures?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, across Europe we're seeing that. I think it's possibly the biggest catalyst for all of the change that we've seen come through, really. You know, the new banks wouldn't be in existence if it wasn't for slightly relaxed, shall we say, or modernised. You know, relaxed gives an implication that actually they're making it, you know, easier for people to do things that they shouldn't be doing, and that's not the case. You know, they're actually allowing and introducing new people into the mix, and really I think the regulator, their understanding of technology and their understanding of actually what it is that's changing in the environment is kind of the best change that we've seen, quite frankly. And, you know, that's why we're seeing things like this coming through, really. It's you know, they're trying to pitch where the future's going with regards to collaboration between very large entities and smaller, more agile ones, and then, you know, making it happen through regulation.
It seems the UK, one more question for David. It seems the UK is leading the way in that. We're here in the continent. What can continental European governments learn from the UK government in that regard?
I think the UK is a kind of a benefit of circumstance to a certain degree in terms of what we're doing. I think I kind of alluded it to earlier on. If you've got a very large financial system with a lot of banks that have got problems, then actually it's easier to find startups to come and try and fix them. I think into continental Europe, I think there are maybe as bigger banking organisations like Nordea, but don't quite have the exact same problems that we've sort of seen. So the fintech scene hasn't been as sort of prevalent over there. I think the regulator has played a very large part, and even into the governments as well in terms of what we're doing. The kind of ambassadorial roles that those guys are doing now to really sort of foster innovation not only within the UK but actually cross borders and overseas. And I was at the Innovate Finance presentation. Feels like a long time ago. It might have been Monday this week actually, about where the FCA were actually unveiling the sandbox for products. This is a process that most banking organizations, it takes 18 months to 24 months to kind of launch a new product and take it to market. And actually what the regulator is doing with regards to the FCA is relaxing some of those rules and adopting almost like fintech practices, having an alpha program, a beta program that the FCA actually sponsors through this sandbox to allow them to move much faster through those pieces and isolate customers who are interested in getting access to new capability and new products a lot faster. So I think the regulator really has to be applauded. FinTech probably wouldn't be as big a thing as it is today without the support of all of the regulators.
Lars, you have a final thought for the panel and the audience.
Yeah, I can just completely agree with David. PSD2 is not, we had a discussion yesterday as well, PSD2 shouldn't be, and it's not about pro-startup or pro-bank, it's just pro-innovation. So at the end, what PSD2 is all about is that data who belongs to us, our customers, until now have been kept in the silo of a bank. And now PSD2 is cracking this up and opens a lot of possibilities for everyone who wants to do something. And that doesn't mean it has to be a startup. Like as David mentioned, we're talking in Germany with a lot of banks, and we saw a tremendous shift in thinking from the banks. So banks actually considering using technology like ours for their own products. So they don't have to be only provider of the data, they can also access the data and do something with it. It's not just for a startup.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the audience that has questions for the panel?
Liisa, can you tell me who is going to end up funding the cost of all the work the bank's going to have to do? Because in this age of data breach, which is one of the biggest risks anywhere, we're seeing them all the time, if you're opening up to TPPs, who's going to pay for the security around following those TPPs in and out of your customer accounts?
That's not sure I understood your question right. So are you touching the liability issue?
Twofold. So one is the bank cost of being allowing a TPP in is going to cost a lot in your systems to try and follow them in and out and make sure they don't get anywhere else.
That's the compliance. That's part of the compliance cost.
And then is the liability. What happens if there is a big data breach because the TPPs come in and all these TPPs are young startups? Some are going to be very honest like Lars, I'm sure, but there's going to be a lot of cybercrime.
Yes. Well, that's exactly why we have to make absolutely sure that the security issues are done in a proper way, because we can't afford that situation that there is a data breach or there are criminals trying to use PSD2, which is with good intentions. But there might be also criminals trying to use it. So that's why we have to make sure that the strong authentication is end-to-end, and we have the directories in place for the licensed TPPs, so that we can check that this company, which is registered in Cyprus, nothing against Cyprus, but then is kind of accessing our systems, and we'll have to let them in and give them the information. We absolutely need to have a very good or higher security level in place.
So is the customer going to have to pay more fees? That's what I'm saying.
I don't think that the end users are happy to pay for the payments. That's the starting point, at least in our markets. I don't think that they want to do that, and as I mentioned, it's a huge cost that the banks are put to swallow, and it's it's amazing to me.
Which just the enablement of the APIs is a huge amount of cost in itself,
absolutely.
Isn't it? So
already the mandatory compliance, to be mandatory compliant.
So beyond that, into like you say, the liability thing, it is, I don't want to sound like I'm sorry, it is a very large statement that the regulation has made that requires huge amounts of investment from the banks to actually enable. So, but I guess for years, regulatory change has actually been a huge amount of
but that's not
huge
the
part.
only regulation that we're working on.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have a couple of others.
We will have to end the discussion here. I know there are some more questions in the audience, but the panel members will be here all day. That's also where networking is about, asking each other questions. Why do we have to end? Because in this room, the payment pitches will be there. I already see some pictures being ready, so it would be a bit cruel to let them wait. I want to thank you all, and of course I want to thank the panel. Thank you.